Hey Luna, you know how everyone talks about speaking or listening to English to learn better, right? I mean, it's totally true that practice is key, but have you ever thought about the power of taking notes?
Yeah, I've heard that before, but honestly, it feels like people forget about it. Everyone's so focused on speaking or listening, but taking notes can actually help so much.
Yeah, I mean, when we listen to English or have conversations, we're getting a lot of input, which is great. But writing down what we hear, what we learn, it's like adding an extra layer to the process.
Right. It helps to remember the stuff, especially when you're writing it down. It's like you're actively engaging with the language, not just passively absorbing it. But, you know, there's that famous idiom that goes, the palest ink is better than the strongest memory.
Oh, I love that one. It's kind of like saying even the faintest writing will stick better than just trying to remember something in your head. Like, if you write it down, your brain has a better chance of keeping it for the long run.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that writing something down, even if it's just a quick note, helps your brain to process and store the information much more effectively than just trying to remember it. So, why not use that as a strategy while learning English?
Totally. And it doesn't just have to be notes from classes or textbooks. We can take notes while watching movies, listening to podcasts, or even chatting with friends. Every time you hear a new word or phrase, jot it down.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. It's not just about writing the words, but actively thinking about them. For example, we can write down why we like a certain phrase or how it could be used in different situations.
Yeah, it's like making the notes personal to you, so you can remember them in your own way. But okay, now I'm thinking, how exactly can we take better notes that actually help us improve our English?
Hmm, good question. Let's talk about that next. We'll also introduce a very powerful method of note taking in this program, which will be very helpful for you to improve your English.
All right, Luna, so now we're diving into something a bit more creative, visual notes. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get so lost in dense paragraphs, or what we call walls of text.
Oh, same here. It's like you're staring at the page, but nothing's really sticking in your head. The information just sort of blurs together, right? But with visual notes, you can break things down in a way that makes it way easier to digest.
Yes, exactly. So instead of just writing down a long paragraph, you can use flowcharts, diagrams, mind maps, or even just simple pictures. It makes everything more organized and clear.
Mm-hmm. And what's cool is that your brain actually processes visuals much faster than plain text. Like, think about it. When you look at a diagram or a flowchart, your brain can immediately understand the relationship between ideas without having to read through a ton of text.
Right. It's like you get the big picture way faster. Visuals help to connect ideas and show patterns in a way that words sometimes can't. Plus, the brain loves visuals.
So, when you're learning English, try turning those grammar rules or vocabulary lists into something visual. For example, you can draw a mind map for new phrases, showing how they connect to different situations or emotions.
Oh, I love that. It's so much easier to remember when you see it laid out like that. It's like turning abstract concepts into something concrete.
And even with images, like simple drawings or symbols, they can help trigger your memory when you're reviewing your notes later. It's much more engaging than just reading the same text over and over.
Yeah, and if you're not that into drawing, no worries. You can use online tools for mind maps and diagrams too. It's all about finding what works best for you to visualize the information.
And in the end, the more fun and interactive you make your notes, the more you'll enjoy reviewing them, and the more likely you are to remember what you learned.
So, visual notes aren't just a trend, they really help make learning more effective and enjoyable. I mean, who doesn't like a good mind map or diagram? Okay, Luna, we've talked about visual notes, but let's dive into something even more classic, handwriting. I know it's a bit old school, but did you know it actually helps you remember better?
Oh, for sure. I mean, using a pen and paper might feel like a lot of extra work sometimes, right? But there's actually research that backs it up. I remember reading about a study from Princeton University in 2014.
Ah, yes, that study. So they divided a class into two groups, right? One group had to take notes by hand, like the old-fashioned way, pen and paper. And of course, people were complaining because it takes effort, cramps your hand, and just feels slow sometimes.
Yeah, I can totally relate. The other group, though, got to use laptops or phones to take notes, which, let's face it, is way faster. They could type way more. So, you'd think the laptop group would have an advantage in remembering stuff, right?
Exactly. But here's the twist. At the end of the semester, the students who wrote their notes by hand actually scored twice as well on tests compared to the laptop group. Can you believe that?
Whoa, that's surprising. But it makes sense when you think about it. The study found that taking notes by hand is more effortful, right? You have to think about what to write and how to organize your thoughts, which means your brain has to work harder.
Right. It's the principle of effort. Basically, the more effort you put into learning something, the more you'll remember it. Writing things down by hand forces your brain to process and understand the material, rather than just passively copying things.
And that's why passive learning, like listening to audiobooks or lectures, isn't enough on its own. You need to be actively engaged with the material to really retain it.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway from the study. So, when you're learning English, maybe try writing down new vocabulary or phrases by hand, even if it feels slower. It could help you remember them better in the long run.
Totally. The effort you put into writing it out actually makes the information stick in your mind. It's all about being active, not just passive, when learning.
So, even though typing might be quicker and easier, don't underestimate the power of handwriting when it comes to learning. It's definitely a game changer. All right, Luna, let's talk about something that I think a lot of people skip, rereading and updating your notes. I know, it sounds kind of boring, but hear me out. If you revisit your notes, it can really boost your learning.
For sure. I mean, when you first take your notes, you're just capturing the basics. The first version is kind of like your rough draft of what you understood at that moment. But as you learn more, you can go back and refine those notes.
So, let's say you're learning a new grammar point. The first time you take notes on it, it might be super simple, like past tense, verb plus ed. But then, after you've studied more, you start to understand how it works with irregular verbs. So you go back and update your notes, adding more details.
And this helps a lot with clarifying any misunderstandings. Maybe at first, you thought went was just a random past tense verb. But after some more study, you realize it's actually the past of go. Updating your notes helps you see that connection and avoid confusion later.
Right. It's all about refining your notes as your understanding gets deeper. And don't worry about making it perfect at first. The goal is clarity over aesthetics, which means don't stress about making your notes look pretty. Just make sure they actually help you understand.
Oh, I like that. You don't need to make everything look like a Pinterest board. It's more about how useful your notes are. And another thing, grouping ideas together can help spot patterns and make connections. So, if you're studying vocabulary, group words by theme, like travel, food, emotions, etc.
That's a great idea. It's way easier to remember words when you group them by category. Like, if you're learning different ways to say happy, you can write them in a list: joyful, content, delighted, and then add a sentence next to each word showing how you'd use it.
And once you start grouping, you'll notice patterns that help you remember the words or concepts. Maybe you'll realize that joyful is more formal than happy, or that content is often used with. So, your notes become more dynamic as you keep adding details.
Yeah, And after a few iterations, your notes will start to look like a map of the language, not just a list of random facts. You'll see how everything connects together, and it'll stick with you much better.
Definitely. And one more thing, active recall. This is key. Rather than just rereading your notes over and over, challenge yourself to test your memory. Cover up parts of your notes and try to write down what you remember.
Oh, that's the best part. Active recall really forces you to dig deeper into your brain and pull out what you know. It helps with long-term memory because you're not just passively looking at the notes, you're engaging with them.
And you could also use apps like Anki or Quizlet for this. You make flashcards based on your notes and use them to quiz yourself. The more you test yourself, the stronger the memory becomes.
So, by updating your notes, organizing them in a way that makes sense, and practicing active recall, you're really making sure that the language sticks with you. It's all about keeping the process active, not just passive.
Yep. So make sure you're not just writing notes and forgetting them. The more you interact with your notes, the more you'll learn. It's all about engagement.
Okay, Luna, let's move on to something that really helps take your note-taking to the next level, writing questions in your notes. You might think it's just extra work, but trust me, it's super helpful.
Oh, 100%. Writing questions in your notes is a game changer. It guides you into active learning instead of just passively reading through your notes. You're actually hunting for answers, which makes you engage much more deeply with the material.
So, let's say you're studying grammar. Instead of just writing down the rule, ask yourself a question like, what's the difference between present perfect and past simple? Then, as you learn, you're actively searching for that answer.
And this technique actually helps you think like an exam writer. You start to predict what questions might come up in a test or what concepts are more important. It's like preparing yourself for whatever comes your way.
Oh, for sure. I use this trick all the time. For example, I might write a question like, how do you use the word although in a sentence? And then I try to answer it with a few examples right in my notes.
Oh, that's great. And you can also use your questions as a self-testing tool. It's like creating your own mini quiz from your notes. So, if you're using apps like Notion, you can make toggle-style Q&A, where you write the question and hide the answer until you're ready to check it.
That's awesome. So, let's say you're learning vocabulary. You could write something like, what does the word meticulous mean? And then, underneath it, you put the definition but hide it behind a toggle. Later, you can test yourself. If you remember it, awesome. If not, go back and review it.
It makes the whole process more interactive. You're not just copying information, you're actively questioning it and making sure it really sticks. And this method works perfectly for languages because we're constantly learning new words, grammar rules, and expressions.
And here's a method that works great for this. Have you heard of the QEC method?
Wait, I've heard of it, but can you explain it to me in more detail?
Sure. QEC stands for question, explanation, and check. It's a simple method to structure your notes. First, you write a question about what you're learning. Then, you write a detailed explanation of the answer. Finally, you check your understanding by reviewing and testing yourself on the material.
Oh, that sounds super effective. Can you give an example to show how it works?
Absolutely. Let's say you're learning about how to form the future tense in English. Your first step is to write the question, how do you form the future tense in English? Then you answer it with an explanation like, you use will or going to form the future tense. Example, I will go to the store or I am going to study.
Okay, I see where this is going. And then for the check part, you could quiz yourself later. You could hide your explanation and try to recall how to form the future tense without looking at your notes.
And once you check your answer, you can refine your notes by adding more examples or making your explanation clearer if needed. The point is to make sure you're constantly engaging with your learning material, not just passively reading it.
That's brilliant. So, The QEC method is really all about making sure you actively understand the material and can recall it. It's a great way to make sure your notes aren't just for show. They're actually helping you learn.
Exactly. So, next time you're writing notes, try incorporating questions, explanations, and self-testing. It'll definitely take your English learning to the next level. All right, Luna, we've covered a lot today. To wrap things up, I want to remind our listeners of something that can really boost their English learning. We've been talking about note-taking, and I think it's a great time to recommend our English learning ebook.
Yes, absolutely. The ebook is called 16 Skills to Handle Any English Conversation, and it's packed with practical skills for mastering real-life conversations. Whether you're discussing the past, talking about future plans, or even rejecting someone politely, this book covers it all.
And I'd recommend using the note-taking methods we talked about today to study it. You can write questions in your notes, create visuals, or even follow the QEC method to really understand and retain these skills. That way, you're not just reading the book, you're actively engaging with it.
The best part is that these skills are reusable. You can apply them in any relevant conversation. Whether you're at work, at a party, or just chatting with friends, the skills in this book will make you feel confident and ready to speak English in any situation.
So, whether you're a beginner or intermediate learner, this book can really help you master the skills you need. And remember, the note-taking methods we discussed today can help you make the most out of the book and improve your English even faster.
To sum up today's episode, we talked about how note-taking can help you learn English more effectively. We shared how visual notes, handwriting, updating your notes iteratively, and writing questions can really take your learning to the next level.
We also discussed the QEC method as a super effective way to structure your notes, helping you engage with the material actively. And of course, don't forget about active recall. That's the real secret to making your notes work for you.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope these tips help you in your English learning journey. Make sure to check out the ebook, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks, Luna, and thanks to all our listeners. Take care and happy studying.